Inclusive Research Podcast, VIR. I'm your host, Dr. Ren, founder of Diverse Research Now. And today you will hear the voice of Dr. Camille Campbell. Dr. Campbell is a highly accomplished healthcare leader with over 18 years of experience at the intersection of biopharma, health tech startup, community engagement, and clinical care. She currently serves as the lead for health equity and clinical innovation at a pharma company called Biogen. She is passionate about empowering Black and Brown communities and improving representation in clinical research. So I'm super excited to talk to Dr. Campbell today. So let's go ahead and get started. How are you doing today, Dr. Campbell?
I am fine. It is good to see you, Dr. Renarda. I'm doing great. Excited
Yay!
for the Thanksgiving holiday.
I
I
know
don't know
that's
when this
right.
is going to be posted, but we're recording it right before
Yes,
Thanksgiving.
yes,
So,
recording right before Thanksgiving, but you guys will see it later. But that's okay.
yeah.
We're getting ready. Our belly's ready for that food.
Uh-huh.
Uh, tell us more about yourself, Dr. Campbell. I'm super excited to talk to you. I know we've known each other for a few years, met when you were working with Acclinate, and super excited because I do think that we have some of the same mission out here. So I'm excited to hear your voice today. So tell us more about yourself.
So I'm a pharmacist by profession. Graduated with my PharmD from the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, the best HBCU out there. Go
All
Rattlers.
right.
And knew pretty early in my career that I wanted to go into pharmaceutical industry. And so right after pharmacy school, completed a fellowship within pharmaceutical industry and stayed in what I like to call traditional quote unquote pharmaceutical industry for about 15 years. And the roles that I had were in this functional area called medical affairs. So I was a medical science liaison. I was a medical director. As a medical science liaison, I was always responsible for conveying medical information and clinical information to like physicians and pharmacists and people who were looking to use the drugs and the patients that they were treating and making sure they knew all the most up-to-date data. They understood how safe the drugs were, how to manage the safety, how to dose it, all the things. And then I did the same thing as like a medical director in a headquarters-based position where I was helping to develop the strategy for when like drugs were going to come into the market, helping physicians understand what does our data mean from like the clinical trials and how would you use that data to treat your patients and like strategizing around that. So I did that for like 15 years. And I
Okay.
was always in working in these therapeutic areas where, you know, if you look at it, often disproportionately impacted like Black and Brown communities, so people who look like me or my dad or my mom,
Mhm.
my brother, my sister-in-law. So I worked in HIV, I worked in hepatitis C, I worked in oncology for several years. I worked in prostate cancer, breast cancer, and pancreatic cancer. And it was really when I was working in prostate cancer at a big pharmaceutical company, shout out to AstraZeneca, where I realize how the pull through of clinical data and like making sure that there was a representative population in the clinical trials, like that, how important that pull through was for clinicians because they wanted to know that the drugs that they were going to be using in their patients had been studied in patients who look like their patients, who maybe had the same comorbidities, which just means that they might have other diseases that go along, like with whatever disease that drug is being studied for. And so I was working in the prostate cancer space and realized that it wasn't just like an issue with my company, but other companies as well in the prostate cancer space, that like we were having these phenomenal phase 3 study readouts and like the data were positive and the drug was, you know, safe for what it was worth, right? The benefits were outweighing the risks. But when you looked at the demographics of who was in those clinical trials, it wasn't representative of who was more likely to get like advanced prostate cancer in the US. In the US, you know, Black men twice as likely to be diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer, twice as likely to die from it. If those stats still hold true, it might even be a little bit higher now. I have to look at my stats. But anyway, that was the situation. But when you looked at the demographics of the clinical trials, you did not see like black men represented. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, why is that? I was like, how can we have like, all these clinical trials, right? Several big phase 3 studies. We're enrolling hundreds of people. Granted, they're global trials, right? So
Yeah.
it wasn't just the US, right? You had patients from Japan and
Yeah.
Europe and other countries and things like that. But you still had like a significant amount of clinical trial sites in the US, yet not seeing the patients who would be most likely to use the drug in the real world being
Right.
enrolled at the sites that were being included in these clinical trials. And I was like, that's a problem.
I
And
have been to so many conferences like that, okay, where
mhm.
those results have been read out, and I see like, oh, there's no black people in
Yes.
or brown people. Like, okay,
Yeah. And, I started to like realize it and point it out, but there wasn't really, I don't know. I mean, folks made recognition of it, but there wasn't like a need or a thought that like this could maybe impact our business if we don't do things differently.
ah,
Until
uh-huh,
we had a situation. Actually, there were several different things that happened. One of the things that happened, and I remember this like it was yesterday, again, as a medical director, you're
mhm,
responsible for, helping to communicate the data.
mhm,
And our patient advocacy team, because like pharmaceutical companies, they'll have like a patient advocacy, have lots of different teams and functional areas or whatever in the company. The patient advocacy lead had come to me and said, hey, I've got all these, patient advocacy groups that want to hear about the phase 3 data readout that we just had. Would you be okay getting on this call with these leads of these like large patient advocacy groups who are representing, men with prostate cancer across
yeah,
the country and talking about the data that we just had at this big conference, the efficacy, the safety, walk through it and all the things. I'm like, sure. So I get
yeah,
on the call. There was one patient advocacy group represented on the call, and the like president or the CEO of that group was an older black gentleman. He was a prostate cancer survivor and he was a physician. I think he may have been an oncologist, but I'm not sure. He was definitely like an MD. I remember like I was going through the data and I'm, all these people on the call. And he stopped me. It was like,
uh-huh,
were there any black people in this clinical trial? And I was like, and he was like, I'm just looking at your demographics. And, we had not presented the demographic. I don't even think we had presented the race and ethnicity data like as
yeah,
clearly as we probably could have.
yeah,
So the data were not in the slides that I was presenting
yeah,
because I think I was presenting like straight from the Congress presentation. And so I was like, actually, I would need to go back and look and see, what was the demographic breakdown. And I feel like maybe during that call, I had an opportunity, like there was a little break and I was able to like go and find the information. And when I went back and shared like that, there weren't, it was like a very, very small amount of black people in that clinical study, black
yeah,
men. And he was just like, yeah, I don't know how comfortable I would be prescribing this medication to the
yeah,
group of patients that I treat. He's like,
yeah, that's the thing.
yeah, he had to have been an oncologist because he was like, I'm a black oncologist. And he was like,
Yeah,
most of the men that come to me are black patients with advanced prostate cancer. And he was like, they're likely going to be the ones, that I would prescribe this drug to because of, what indication it's going to be approved for. But he was like, but I don't see them represented here. And he was
yeah,
like, if there are other options where I have data that do show that they're represented and that the drug, that other option is safe and efficacious, he was like, I might be more inclined to lean towards that because I know that what to expect from that drug in my patient population. And I was just like, you have a great point, sir. Like I couldn't like
nothing
combat
you
it.
can
Like
say.
I was like,
Yeah,
you're absolutely right, doc. Like
yeah,
you know. And so it was at that point where I was like, man, we got to do better.
we
And
gotta do better.
so we had some other studies coming up. And, I'll give all the kudos to AZ, to AstraZeneca, because there was a concerted effort at that time to like focus more on clinical trial diversity. And so
Hmm.
there were like a couple of different clinical trial diversity work streams. And I ended up co-leading one of those work streams within our oncology division. And myself and a couple of other people actually came up with a specific project where we went back to the investigators of that first phase 3 study that didn't have like a great recruitment of Black
Hmm.
patients or just honestly marginalized patients, period, right? It
Yeah,
was, yeah.
yeah,
And we were like, we talked to several of the investigators and said, well, what could we have done differently? What could you have done differently? Like, how do we do better? Because we had other studies coming. And then, we got a lot of great insights from them about
good.
efforts that they had made whether it worked or not. And then they also gave us advice on some of the additional support that they would have appreciated and like that we could think about for the future. And then like the subgroup that I was leading, like we went back and we presented that information to like our clinical development team and the medical team so that we could do things differently for the next study. So, but it was like, that experience right there made me think like, wow, this really could have business impact, right? Because technically, you're not even supposed to market your drugs overtly to patient subgroups that haven't been represented in your clinical trials. Like the FDA, like they're pretty big about like, when you look at a commercial or like a TV commercial where a drug is being marketed, whoever is represented in that commercial, like it should be a reflection of who you actually studied the drug in. And if you're not matching the two, then it can even impact like how you market your drug, right? Like, oh, you
That's
can't put,
interesting. Okay.
yeah.
I don't know if I knew that.
Yes, there's a whole division within the FDA called the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion,
Uh-huh.
OPDP. And
Uh-huh.
like that's literally one of their main jobs is to regulate how industry markets drugs. And one of the things that they look at is, when you have a visual aid that maybe you're showing a physician, or if you have a commercial that's going to be on TV that patients and whoever are going to see, you can't have visuals and representation on those aids or those commercials and things like that that don't reflect who's actually studied in the clinical trial, regardless of who's
Ah.
going to be using the drug in the real world.
Oh, so
So,
that's why all the commercials are just they're not people of color in the commercials
so
because
exactly.
they're
I'm
not
not gonna
showing.
say exactly, but yes. So, like for instance, again, I don't want to call out specific companies, but like there's like a commercial for like a vitiligo, a drug that treats vitiligo. And in the commercial, so in my work over the years, just learning about like prevalence and incidence data for different diseases, like one of the things that actually surprised me about vitiligo was that vitiligo is not necessarily like more prevalent in like black patients, right? Like the incidence in, black versus white or whatever, black, brown
Uh-huh.
skin color is it's the same. But
Okay.
on a darker skinned person, you're
Right.
going to
You
see
see,
the
yeah.
impact more than you would on like a lighter skinned person or let's say like what you would call a white patient. And so I remember seeing like a commercial for a drug to treat vitiligo, and I noticed that in the commercial they weren't using like the patients were not like as dark as I am, right?
Uh-huh.
They weren't as
Uh-huh.
chocolate as I am. And I
Yeah.
thought, that's interesting. So they were using like they were brown patients represented in the commercial. And it made me like go back and look at the clinical trial to see like, well, what were the demographics? And like, again, I'm no dermatology guru, but there's like scoring for like the darkness of your
The-
skin that is used to
yeah.
deter like in the field of dermatology. And the average score or whatever of the patients that were included in those vitiligo studies for that drug, it was not the darkest hue, right? It was like
Okay.
medium hue. And I was
Okay.
like, and that's probably why you don't see a whole lot of like chocolate
Right.
like me in the commercials
Right.
because that's not who was represented
Okay.
in the clinical trials. And that particular company wasn't able to showcase like or not showcase but wasn't able to show even though the drug may work just as well in darker skin, lighter skin, medium tone, whatever, like they weren't able to show that in their commercials because that's not who was included in the clinical trials.
Yeah.
So
But
yes,
they don't
there's
know really. They don't know
yeah,
really know because they
yeah.
wasn't in the study.
But yes, there is a whole division in the FDA that like that's what they do. And they will write letters to pharmaceutical companies when they do market products in a way that maybe they'll say this is misleading or, this visual doesn't match that. Look at your clinical, like they'll call pharmaceutical companies out and ask them to correct
Okay.
that because they don't want you
Right.
misleading the public or the patients or physicians. So,
Yeah. So that's a checkbox. That's definitely for that department and for the pharma world, like a checkbox. Hey, make sure
hmm
the visuals are actually representing what was in our study. So what about engaging beyond those check boxes? So because I know you have led community engagement efforts, in several different organizations. And so what have the communities taught you
Yeah.
like true engagement, like how real true engagement would look like.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of leads me. I took a little detour talking about my life, right? So I'll get back on track. So that leads me to the role I had after I left AZ. So when I was at AstraZeneca, again, I was the medical director, but I was doing like clinical trial diversity, health
Huh.
equity work on top of my medical director job.
Okay.
And I was also doing some workforce inclusion work too, because I was just like, we need more diverse thought on this
There
team,
you
right?
go.
Like
There
I
you
was the
go.
only Black woman medical director, I think, in oncology medical affairs. I had a
Yes.
counter,
Yes.
huh? I had a counterpart. I had a Black male counterpart. I won't
Uh-huh.
say his name, but shout out to him. And it was a diverse organization, but
Mhm.
you could always use more representation. And
Of
so I was doing some workforce inclusion and representative initiatives at AZ as well to kind of create a more diverse pipeline of
course.
talent and so we
Mhm.
could be more intentional about people we were bringing into our organization. So anyway, I was doing that and I just decided like I think I want to do this health equity thing more fully. Like,
Okay.
it was a lot doing that and trying to like launch these drugs,
Yeah.
with my
Yeah.
traditional medical director and strategy position. So I ended up leaving traditional pharma. I left AstraZeneca and went to a company called Acclinate, which was like, well, it still exists, like a health tech startup that
Mm.
worked adjacent to pharma. And what I really liked about Acclinate is that they led with community
Yes.
first. And it
Yes.
was like, we'll
I
partner.
love that about them as well.
So the thinking was like, we'll partner with pharmaceutical
Yes.
companies on their clinical trial diversity initiatives. And
Yes.
at the time, the FDA had come down with like a couple of guidances
Yep.
related to clinical trial diversity that it was new because the FDA was now trying to hold companies accountable
Mhm.
for doing this work and doing it really intentionally and saying
Yeah.
like it's not a nice to have. We're going to ask you to submit like these clinical trial diversity plans before you even start your studies so that we know that you're thinking about this from the beginning.
Do you
um,
know what triggered that? Because I always think like, why did it just all of a sudden happen like that? I mean, we both been in this field for so long,
mhm.
and then all of a sudden, like FDA, NIH, like wanted to make
Well,
sure that diversity, because I don't think it was a requirement before to report
well,
demographics.
listen, it ain't a requirement now, but that's a whole nother story. Because,
Okay.
because like as the politics and things have
Yeah.
changed, the guidance hasn't been enforced the way I know
Yeah.
many of us would have liked to have seen it be enforced. But I wouldn't
Mhm.
even say that it was all of a sudden. I mean, you could go back to I don't know how early, but it's a good 20 years or so, and the FDA and the NIH have put out like guidances or language
Mhm.
recommendations on broadening the scope of clinical trials and improving
Okay.
representation. What made the clinical trial diversity plan guidance so different, and that came out in like 2022, was
Yeah.
that they were actually now, you had this government entity now actually trying to hold people accountable and
Okay.
saying, not
So
only are we going to give
accountability
you
is what changed.
recommendations on how to do it, but we're going to ask you to submit the plan, right?
Okay. So they were
It's,
now putting
yeah.
accountability in place.
Yeah, so that was the difference. So I wouldn't say it was new. And, I like to say that honestly, most folks, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies, physicians, patients, regulatory authorities, really understand the need and why it's important to have representation in the clinical trials, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to make sure the drugs work just as well in the real world population and they're just as safe as they are when they were studied. And people have always thought that, but it was the now we're gonna like make you intentionally think about it
Yeah. Yeah.
and submit a plan that made it
Yeah.
different. So the timing of me going to Acclinate really worked out well because you had these pharmaceutical companies, some who had, again, already started the thinking of like, how do we make our trials more diverse? How
Mhm.
do we be more inclusive and, really build trust with communities that haven't trusted us before and
Right.
bring research opportunities to them, educate around the importance of considering participation but not forcing like that. There were some companies that had been doing this work, but there were other companies where this was like new.
Yeah.
And the thinking was, well, how do we do this, right? we're a pharmaceutical company. Our job is to develop
Right.
drugs. We want to, like, whatever, cure disease, manage disease in patients.
But it can't happen without those
it,
participants
it can't happen without the
volunteers.
participants. And you got to go into these new communities
Mhm.
that you maybe haven't had experience going into before. They might not know you, they might not trust you. And so, you found some companies kind of struggling with, like, well, how do we do this? Like, this is not our expertise. And so the cool thing about Acclinate, it was like, all right, well, this is our expertise, right?
Yes.
Like, we
Let us
can
help
part.
you.
Yes, let us help you. We can partner with you.
Yes.
We can help identify the gaps and then also, like, actually execute, right? Like, and help kind of be the arms and the
Yep.
legs and go into the communities where you haven't engaged before and help you to build trust. And then, when it's time, because it takes time to build trust, and you really
It
should
definitely
act like you
does.
care about people and build trust before you ask them to do something. When it's when it's time, help you offer whatever, research opportunities you're looking to offer. And so I was at Acclinate as the chief medical lead and the senior director for health equity for several years. And it was a really great experience because, like, when I say we led community first, like, it was community first. We tried to use the insights and the data that we got from being in community to inform our work. And so what you learn is that every community is different, right? Like, even if people are the same or similar race and ethnicity, right? I identify as a Black woman. My experience as a Black woman living in, the Washington, D.C. area with the background that I have could be very different from a Black woman in the healthcare system living in rural, Mississippi,
Yeah.
right? And so you have to really go in and be humble with a lot of
Yep.
humility and listen to what people really care about, what it
Yep.
is that they need. And then once you're able to build trust and, like, fill the gaps around basic needs when it comes to healthcare, knowledge, and things like that, and you keep going back over and over again, and you build relationships with the people who live in the community and the trusted messengers who can kind of, like, share with others whatever you're trying to talk about from a healthcare clinical trial perspective, like, over time, it makes it so much easier to then offer an opportunity like clinical trial and somebody actually consider it. And so I would say, like, that's one of the main things that is, I think it's something I always, like, knew, right? Like, you always subconsciously know that as a person, right? But, like, to do it every day and experience it in, like, all the different communities where we would, like, go and do activations, like, it just, it made it so real. It was like, no, we know when we go to Philly, right? Like, this is how we have to engage when we go to Philly
Exactly.
versus when we go to, Huntsville, Alabama. Yes.
I
And I enjoyed my time at Acclimate. And it was awesome to be able to then take those learnings and share those back with, like, these companies that, sometimes had that blind spot and didn't realize, like, they weren't engaging in the most genuine way or in the most trustworthy way. And then realizing, like, over time, after doing that, you could actually, and also offer something. That's the other thing. Don't just go in and say, oh, I want you to be in my
my
clinical
favorite thing
trial.
to do. I say that all the time. We
Mm-hmm.
have to
Yeah.
give back. We have to give back and
Mm-hmm.
offer something. That's all a part of building trust. There has to
Yep.
be like some shared benefit here, you know.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
I love that. It sounds like you're saying that your experience in the community and true engagement is really about knowing the community,
Mm-hmm.
knowing what community you're going into. And not just, oh, this is the Black community, this is the Hispanic community, this is the Asian community. No, like, it goes a little deeper than that. Because, like you said, that Black woman in Washington, D.C., with your background, and that Black woman in rural Mississippi is going to be
Mm-hmm.
completely different. So
Mm-hmm.
your needs are going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what equity is all about. Like, health equity is all about, like, giving
Mm-hmm.
you what you need to, like,
Exactly.
for the best health. So what do you think is one of, like, the biggest barriers to, like, really meaningful representation, like, in clinical research? Is it still trust? in the Black community? Because I know when I first started the DRN, like everybody was talking about trust, trust, trust. Like we have this mistrust, you know. But I really don't know if that's what the biggest barrier is anymore. And
Well,
I,
I don't, yeah, I mean, you asked about the biggest. I don't know what the biggest is. Trust is
uh-huh,
still a barrier, but
yeah,
again, it's not a barrier with everybody, right? So
yeah,
I think one of the biggest barriers is thinking that everybody's got the
that's
same
the same
barrier, and they
barriers.
don't.
I like that. Okay,
Like, we don't have the same
that's
barriers.
good.
And making it again monolithic, right? Saying, well, all black people mistrust and all Hispanic people this and all Native Americans this. Actually, that's not true.
That's
Like
true.
I would say for the
Come
most
on,
part, I trust the healthcare system.
come
Right.
on.
You know, again, I'm a pharmacist. I'm
I'm a Black woman.
right. Yeah. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest barriers is just assuming that everybody has the biggest
I
barrier,
like
is the
that.
same
Okay,
barrier. Like, no, we don't. Right. But let's not say that trust isn't a barrier because it is.
yeah,
There are a lot of
of
folks.
course.
And again, you know, again, there are white folks who also distrust the system, right? It's
That's
not,
right.
it ain't just us, right? So again, it's thinking that, you know,
Two things could
grouping
be true
people
at one time.
you really have to understand communities. You got to understand people at the individual level to see what their barriers are and address the
Yeah,
gaps.
yeah.
I'll also say one of the biggest issues I have is, you know, we like to put the onus on the patient to do a lot of work.
Mhm.
And that's not fair. Like, that's
Come
not
on,
right.
come
Most
on.
patients don't have a healthcare background, right? And
Right.
so, or even if they do have a healthcare background, like, it's two things need to happen. We want patients to to be knowledgeable enough and feel empowered enough to ask questions around clinical trials, right? Well, I don't know what I don't know. But if you educate me, then I now know when I go to my doctor, like I don't know a lot about clinical trials, but I heard somebody talking about it and you know, Dr. Camille or Dr. Wren told me I need to
Uh-huh,
ask my doctor about a clinical
uh-huh,
trial, right? And
uh-huh,
I feel
uh-huh.
empowered enough and comfortable enough to ask my doctor about it because I
Right.
heard, you know, someone that I trust
That's right.
talking about it and they encourage me to do so. But like, it shouldn't always be that the patient has to be empowered to ask. A lot of times, patients aren't being asked to participate. And that is a barrier
That
because,
is
like,
most of the time.
why are
Like,
you not asking and offering? And so we have to be mindful of the biases that exist within the healthcare system, where, you know, whether they're conscious or not, there's an assumption that people don't want to participate from certain communities. And so they don't get asked, or that they're not going to be able to, quote unquote, afford to participate, right? Because sometimes there is you know, there's no cost, but there's a cost. You might have to pay for a certain tests or whatever in order to be eligible for a clinical trial, right? Like, and so there's this assumption made by healthcare providers where they're not even asking people to participate who might want to and who might have the means to if you just ask them the question. So that's a barrier. It's kind of when we don't put the onus when we put all of the responsibility on the patient and don't recognize the biases that exist at the healthcare provider level, but there are also the biases that exist at the structural level, which those are a lot harder to change, right? Like there's
yeah,
just certain things you're not going to be able to change at the structural level
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
But it's the recognition of them and knowing that they're there and having that in the back of your mind as a healthcare provider and saying, well, that might impact whether or not my patient is able to participate, but that shouldn't keep me from asking them. And then you
Yes.
ask, right? So I think those are barriers too, is just not being mindful of the healthcare provider bias that might exist and
Yep.
also the structural barriers that exist that we might not be able to change right away, but if you're going to be operating within the system, be cognizant of them so that you can at least kind of like that can offset whatever personal bias you might have as a healthcare provider.
I love that because I do think that is might be, yeah, you answered my question. Because I feel like that could be the biggest barrier when it comes to the pharma in the sponsor world, not paying enough attention to the role of healthcare providers. Like you said, we're putting so much on recruiting the patient and what the patient needs to do or what the participant needs to do. Like, no, we need to get out here and share with the healthcare providers, like, hey, these research studies are available. This is what they
Mm-hmm.
can do. Like, we need to partner with them in some way. Like, there has to be, I think we need to work on it on both ends. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we educate the participants, we give them what they need to make a decision to get involved, but then we also educate the doctors and
Mm-hmm.
healthcare providers so they are comfortable with presenting this to the patients, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think both ends, both of them have to be addressed, like
Yes,
at the same time,
definitely.
simultaneously.
At the same time. And one of the things that we're seeing pharma companies do, which is
Mhm.
great, is think about like how do we even diversify our clinical trial sites? Or if we can't diversify the sites per se, let those who might not actually be running the clinical trials, but have patients who may be eligible for the clinical trials know about the studies that are nearby. And that way they can recommend that those patients, be connected to that clinical trial site, for consideration in
Yep.
the study. Because a lot of times what we see, and this was especially true in oncology, but again, you see companies making a concerted effort to do things differently, which I love. Is,
Yeah.
you go to the same big old academic medical centers that have like, they have the infrastructure, right? You
Right.
know that they
Right.
can run the studies, right? They
Yep.
have enough staff, they have the equipment, they have, maybe top notch big name key opinion leader who wrote the clinical guidelines and
Yep.
is the researcher, the top researcher in this disease state, and you want him to be the PI on your
Right.
clinical trial. Like that's where you're going all the time
Yep.
to run your studies. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all the patients who would benefit from that clinical trial are going to those academic medical centers. Most of the time, people are going to their community doctors to get treated. They're not going to a big academic medical center, at least not consistently,
Especially in Black and Brown communities. That's
especially in
it's
Black and
just
brown
it's just
communities.
what it is.
Hmm. Or even if the academic medical center is there, right? They not going because they might mistrust it. And
They
I
might
don't.
have had a bad experience. I'm telling you, like you from a Black family, I'm from a Black family. If a family member have a bad experience at a hospital and everybody
Nobody's
know
going back
about it,
there.
no one is going back there in the family.
Uh-huh.
Like the entire family, that's off limits for them. We
They'd
ain't
be
going
like, I'm
back
not
there.
going
We don't
back.
go there.
Or, but I wouldn't even say you relegate that to Black people. I mean, that's with a lot of folks and communities. And
Mhm.
so again, you might make this assumption that, okay, there's this big academic medical center in a majority Black city. Like I live in the Washington, D.C. area. So we have a lot of like well-known
Mhm.
academic medical centers here in Baltimore and things like that.
Mhm.
And it's this, again, a diverse population, the Black, brown, white, all the lovely races and ethnicities
Yeah.
here. I love living in
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
area, but that doesn't mean that the marginalized populations that you're trying to reach with your clinical trials are going to those academic medical centers that might be right there in their city. They might be going to a community practice. They might be going to maybe a hospital that accepts their insurance more readily. Like it's so you
Yeah.
can't make this assumption because that's another thing that'll happen is that the companies will say, "Well, I had a clinical trial site in Baltimore. I don't understand why we
Yeah.
didn't have more Black people." And it's like, well, it takes more than just having the site there, right?
Yeah.
Did you see whether that big academic medical center had satellite community sites? Because a lot of times they do. Well, maybe that's where you need to be trying to recruit from the satellite community sites that are
Yeah.
connected to the medical center but aren't the actual medical center. And
Yeah.
like making sure that whatever eligibility criteria you have or whatever requirements or like maybe equipment needs, because I actually came across this when I was at Acclimate. We were working with one of the companies and they had a large academic medical center that was running a study, and the PI really wanted to open the study at a couple of the satellite community clinics as well that were connected to the academic medical center.
Mhm.
And they weren't able to because there was a requirement in the protocol for like some piece of equipment that only at the big medical center. And he was like, but we don't really need that in order to run this trial. Like, it's very unlikely that, such and such something would happen where that piece of equipment would be needed. And if we
Mhm.
could just adjust the protocol and
Mhm.
take that
Yeah.
out so that I can now open this clinical trial at the community sites that are connected to the academic medical center. So there'll be some oversight, then we could probably like diversify the patient population of this clinical trial. And it was just like, it's those types of conversations that have to happen for us to like kind of change our way of thinking and do things differently and say,
Yeah.
oh, okay, well, maybe we really don't need that piece of equipment, that necessary thing in the
Yeah.
protocol. And this will allow us to still be connected to the academic medical center, but open up the trial to the community. And so it really requires thinking differently about protocols, about community engagement, about, yeah, going into
And outside
communities
the
and building
box.
relationships. Yeah, before you want something. It's like, why you coming to me? You coming to me because you want me to be in a trial. You ain't asked me how I'm doing today. Have I eaten? Right? Like, and we remember that. If people
Yeah.
remember that. Again, it's not a race ethnicity thing. That's just
It's a
humankind.
human thing, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that because I think that it's so important to treat people like people in
Mhm.
this in these
I love
studies.
that.
And I mean, I don't know. I feel like research, there's this bridge, you know what I mean, and between research and the community. And so
Hmm.
we have to, and I know that organizations like Acclinate, Diverse Research Now, like we're trying to bridge that, like
Yeah.
the community needs to have access, they need to understand, they need to have be able to reach out to
Hmm.
scientists and researchers and understand
Yeah.
this, and maybe that's where technology comes in because I know your work at Acclinate, since it was a health tech startup, is that where you found that technology comes in, is really bridging that gap?
Yeah, I think technology comes in a lot of different ways, and I want to place a pin in bridging the gap because I want to talk about some of the work that I'm doing at Biogen now
Uh-huh.
too.
Uh-huh.
But to answer your question about technology, technology helps with reach. Now, again, we can't
Yeah.
make assumptions that everybody has technology. I
Yeah.
guess I don't know what percentage of people have phones these days,
Yeah.
but I would say like, a lot of people have phones, but how people use their phones is very different.
This is
You
true. This is
Yeah,
true.
so again, now you got to start thinking about generational representation, right? Because like, am I on Instagram or am I on TikTok? Am I on Facebook? Am I on whatever, right? Am I
It's
on
true.
any social media? Maybe I only use my phone to text message my family
Right.
because I'm
Right.
older and I want to stay in contact with my grandkids, but I'm not like on face
Yeah.
place
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
some of the elders say, face place.
Yeah.
So I think what technology does, it helps with connection and it helps with reach, but you even have to be mindful of how different people and communities use that technology and lean into that, right? So again, if you're trying to reach a younger generation with information on clinical trials and participation and things like that, maybe you're not on Facebook, right? Maybe you're
Yeah.
doing something more TikTokish, right? But if
Yeah.
you're focused on patient support groups or, again, older generations, you might see them more on Facebook. There might be more people on X. I was just telling some team members recently, we were doing some social media listening like insights, and I asked like the market research company that was presenting the data to like the team. I was like, y'all include threads on here? Like y'all need to start
Yeah,
because I'm like,
threads.
there's this movement, right, where people are transitioning,
That
like
is
certain
so
people from
true.
X to threads. And I'm like, y'all are missing out if you're not including threads as a way
Threads.
that you're trying to reach people, right? Like it's
This is
relatively
so
new. It's
true. I
only been
haven't
around
got
a
on that
year.
yet.
To me, technology helps with reaching people when you can't be there in person, but you have to be mindful of what are the best ways to reach different communities, right? Text messaging. Maybe you have like an online platform. So like, Acclinate had like this online platform called Now Included that existed online, but then it was
Mhm.
also like now included in the streets. So they would
Right.
do a lot of in-person engagement as well.
Right.
But you could also like go online or go to the app and,
Right.
build community, get information about different disease states, get information about different clinical trials. So I think technology helps a lot with reach. I also think that we have a responsibility wherever sector we work in to make sure that we're reaching people with correct information because misinformation is a huge challenge right
Yeah,
now.
that kind of clashes. I feel like there's a clash there, right? Because we say, okay, technology is there to help us reach, but then you have to be careful about it as well. So it's like,
Well, that's why you need to also have real life experts and
yeah,
people
yeah,
that folks can then go to and ask questions to so
exactly.
that
They need
the
to know
experts
where to
can.
go. You need to have like valid people that
Yeah.
or organizations that you could go to for sure.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about your work at Biogen. So, like,
Oh,
because you're building a legacy here, like, you're working at different companies and it's all for health equity. And I don't know if you're leaving this space anytime soon. So, are
yeah.
you going to stay in this space, working in this clinical research space, and you're building this legacy? And so, what is it looking like now?
Well, thank you for thinking I'm building a legacy. I just feel like I'm leaning into where God
Come
has
on, girl.
told me to
I love
go
that.
and to where to use my gifts and talents. And I
Yes.
feel like he has, use the experiences that I had like in medical affairs and
Yep.
then the experiences that I had at Acclinate and said,
Yep.
in medical affairs and pharma, right, at different companies. And then the experience I had doing like the health equity community engagement work very fully at Acclinate and said, go back, take all that experience and like
Go help pharma.
go back and like, the right company and the right opportunity, I will help you use all those different pieces of knowledge to like drive this same mission forward. And so
Right.
that's how I ended up at Biogen. And so I'm the lead for health equity and clinical innovation there. We have a head for health equity. She's dope. Her name is Lauren Powell. And we have a therapeutic area lead, my counterpart. He works a bit more upstream on the clinical trial and the clinical operations part of like trying to ingrain some of these health equity principles into that aspect of the drug development process. And then
Okay.
I work a bit more downstream where it's like, okay, once you've met your clinical trial diversity goals, what do you do with that? Like, how do we, as a health equity team, partner with the marketing team or the patient advocacy team or the medical affairs team to take that pull through of the success we had with the clinical trial diversity and make sure that when the drug actually is going to be out there in the real world, that, physicians know about it in the different communities that are probably going to be using the drugs, that patients know about it. We're getting insights from them. So it's kind of this new thing.
I love it. You have to hit every area. Like health equity has
Mhm.
to be ingrained
It's got
in
to be
every
ingrained throughout the
every
process.
yes.
And so that's really like the nexus of our work that
Yeah.
our small but mighty team is doing at Biogen. But I said about putting like a pin in something that you said previously about like the community, like people needing to see folks like them who look like them or maybe have the same cultural background or the same experiences, like doing this work. I think that there are companies like Acclinate or like your organization that definitely serve as a bridge, but it's also important for people to see that like again, I'm gonna speak for a Black woman, for
Yeah.
other Black women to see that
Yes.
there are Black women who
Yes.
work in pharma at
Yes.
these pharmaceutical companies, like
Yes. It's
trying to
super
make
important.
sure things are equitable, right?
Yes.
Like to know that there are Hispanic and Latino scientists who are very aware of some of the cultural things that might need to be taken into consideration when it comes to exposing their communities to clinical trials and they're working inside the pharmaceutical company, that there are women that, right, like that's important too. So one of the cool things that I like about the work that we do at Biogen is we in the streets too, like
Come
we
on.
it internally, yes, we're trying to ingrain ourselves into all of these different functional areas across the drug development continuum. But then externally, we're in the community. Now, not as much as I was in like my previous role,
Uh-huh.
but like we're going to where the people
As
are.
much as you can be. Because you're
Yeah.
kind of you have to do the work on the inside, but then you
Yes.
also need to do the work on the outside. And that is, oh my God, that's one of the things that I make sure of in the
Mm-hmm.
diverse research now with our events and our
Yeah.
annual clinical trial health forum. We bring people like you, the pharma world, researchers, the people that's in the leadership roles there to the community. You have to
Yes.
be there because we
Yes.
can't do it alone. Like there again, my organization is the bridge, so we want to bring you in the community together. That has,
Exactly.
I mean, physically.
Yes, like literally you show up at
I
the
want you to
event
show
or show
up.
I want to be there and have the conversations with people. And I think it's super helpful, not just for the community members, right? Because then they're like, oh, okay. You hear, oh, you remind me of my granddaughter. What you talking about? You talking about, prostate cancer? And then now they'll listen to you because you remind them of somebody that they know and love. But then also, it's great for the insights that the pharmaceutical company can receive, like directly from community members. So it kind of takes away this, it demystifies things for everybody, right?
Yes.
To just be there.
It's
Like
an
you said,
they identify with you. It's required, I mean, and that's with anyone. It's again, it's not just in the Black community. You identify with people that look like you. And I always get like the question of when they see me out there, they're like, how did you get into this? Like they're always like so surprised at like what I'm talking about and what my
mhm,
mission is and the topic that I'm talking about because it's not being like talked about a lot in our community,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so important. And so, hey, yeah, no, there's someone like you out here trying to tell you, like, hey, this is important. Let's
Mm-hmm.
listen up. Let's take heed to what's going on in this clinical research world. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So they
Mm-hmm.
always are like very surprised. They're like, huh, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, no, it's not us, but we out there too.
Uh-huh.
Black
Yes.
people.
And we have a responsibility, I do feel like,
I
for
love
those
that.
of us, and I guess this is in any profession, right? Like, once you're an expert in a profession,
Yes,
it's your job to help bring people along who might
love that.
benefit from your expertise, right? So, like,
I
it,
love that.
in
That's
that environment, right? Because again, I'm maybe, Dr. Camille, health
yeah,
equity lead, Biogen, blah, 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 blah,
yeah,
at work, but
yeah.
like at home, I'm talking to my parents
That's
about,
right.
healthcare and clinical trials. And as you get older, what do you need to, right? And I'm their daughter, right? Or I'm cousin Camille. I'm who you can
Come
call and who,
on.
you can get the real from, but I know what I'm talking about. And if I don't know what I'm talking about, I will help us find information that is
Exactly.
accurate and
Girl,
meaningful, right?
it
But I
makes
feel like that is a responsibility that we
yes.
now have, is to bring these discussions to our family members, to
Yep,
our friends, to make it less scary, and not in a forceful way. You can't force people to
that's
do
right.
anything, and we shouldn't, but we should want our families, our friends, our communities that have been historically marginalized to be as educated as possible and in a position to make an informed decision when the time comes.
I love it. Completely get it. Don't makes no sense to me to keep all this knowledge for myself.
Right. This isn't
I want to
not for
share it with
you.
my community. With I want to make us better. Like,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? It makes no sense for me to keep what I'm learning to myself. So tell me in one word what you think defines the future of inclusive research. Like, what word comes to mind when you think of inclusive research? Like making sure that everyone is involved in this process.
I don't know if I have one word. You see, I talk a lot.
What a phrase.
A phrase. I would say, well, in this environment, keep going. That's the
Keep
phrase. Keep
going.
going. Keep
Hey,
going. For those of us who do this work,
yeah,
because it has been some stuff, right?
yeah,
These
yeah.
last, there's an attack. We all know that. There's been an attack on
We ain't
DEI,
phased. We ain't
diversity,
gonna let it
equity.
phase us.
So
We gonna keep going. I
keep
love that.
going,
I
right?
love
And the thing is that honestly, there have been people look whose shoulders like we stand on, who've always done this work, have all in their own way, whether it be in
yeah,
pharma, whether it be in community. Like, this
yeah,
is not new. For
yeah,
generations,
yeah.
there have been folks who, it might not have been maybe directly related to clinical
Right,
trial diversity,
right,
but
right,
it's
right.
been related to making sure that marginalized communities have the access that they deserve when it comes to healthcare, that have equitable treatment and things like that. Or it could have been clinical trial diversity. Either way, it's not new, right? And so this isn't the first time that attacks have happened, and the work has continued,
Yep.
maybe under a different name.
Yeah,
Maybe it looks a little bit different, but
yeah.
like, we have to keep going. The problems, the inequities do not go away
They
just
don't.
because the quote unquote powers that
Uh-huh.
be, and I say that
Yeah,
loosely,
yeah,
tell you that DEI is bad,
yeah, yeah.
right? The inequities don't go away, not for various races, not for various ethnicities, not for rural communities, regardless of your race and ethnicity. Like, the inequities still exist. If anything, they may get worse. And
Yeah.
so, with certain policies and stuff that are going to be coming into play. So, we
So we
just
have to get creative.
be resilient and keep going.
And keep going. And I love that. I love that because this work, I always remind myself this work is not something that will happen overnight. Like change won't happen overnight.
Right.
This is gonna be a long haul. You know, like I always say this is a long haul. You're changing like years and years and years of what's been happening
Mm-hmm.
the same. You know what I mean? Like, so,
Mm-hmm.
change takes time. So
Yeah.
yes, we have to keep going. We might not see it, but hey, you know what I mean? Like, I think about that. I'm like, I know I might not see the change, but I'm gonna keep doing the work so like my kids see the change. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you have to think of it like that, I think.
Yeah. And also, but look for change though, because I mean, there has been change. It
Yeah,
might be
we're moving in the right
incremental.
direction. Yeah.
But we're going in the right direction, right? And you look at steady people are even if the enforcement of submitting diversity action plans is not
Mhm.
necessarily happening right now.
Mhm.
The fact that many companies are still putting together diversity action plans because they're like, this is it's the right thing to do for patients, it's the right thing to do for our business. And so we're going to do it and still have these strategies and still go into communities because it's what makes sense, right? And
Yeah.
so you see that people are still doing the work. Start to look at, now every clinical data set that I look at it with like this lens of what is the breakdown of demographics? And I wonder if they
Yeah.
talk about the comorbidities and I wonder if
Yeah.
they talk about rural versus whatever. And I start to dig a little deeper. And you see that like changes have been
Yeah.
made in some instances. And so celebrate the wins,
That's right.
but know that there's still lot
There's
more to
more
be
work to
done.
do, and yeah, just and keep going.
Keep
So
going.
I love that. And I want to ask you like to give a message to like farmer leaders. You're a farmer leader yourself. So I feel like before you even tell me what your message is, like, because the message that I've gotten from just talking to you and the word that I keep hearing you use is assumptions. Like,
Mm.
stop making assumptions. I might title this episode like, cause I love that because you mention assumptions so much, as I do think a
Yeah.
lot of times in the leaders are assuming certain things about different groups and stop making assumptions. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. Stop making assumptions. So there's probably two things. So I love
Okay.
the assumptions because you make assumptions based off of your bias that you probably
Ah,
already have, that we all have. We all have bias.
uh-huh,
But
uh-huh.
then something we actually talk about, my team at Biogen and my Lauren, our head of health equity, kind of pinned this was like invisible. What did she say? Invisible in the data means invisible in invisible in the point is you think you have these you're mitigating the assumptions that you have personally by saying, well, let's go to the data, let's go to the claims data, or let's go to this,
Uh-huh,
that, and the other, and
uh-huh.
see if we can figure out where the gaps are based on that. But you also are assuming that the people you're trying to reach are showing up in the claims data. They might not be. They might not have a
Wow.
primary care physician. They might not be going to the doctor regularly. You also can't assume that the sources that you're currently using to
Mhm,
like fill the gaps that you know
mhm,
exist are
mhm,
totally accurate as well. Now, you
mhm,
might not be able to like fix that right away, but it's
mhm.
just being knowledgeable of saying, like, okay, even if I go to the claims data, even if I go to this or I look up the prevalence, incidents, whatever on this website, like, just know that the people you're trying to reach might not be showing up in that data set either.
That's
So
right.
again, and so you're assuming,
Yep,
you're
yep.
making assumptions. So just be aware of like the assumptions that you
Aware.
may be making
Yep.
and think about how do I mitigate for that. So
Mhm,
you're
mhm.
right. That's one thing I would say. And then the other thing I would say is pharmaceutical companies have to realize that doing this is not just right for patients, it's right for business. When physicians or whoever are making decisions about the prescriptions that are going to be written or what goes on formulary, right?
Mhm.
What's going to be in the clinical guidelines. The more inclusive, representative, and diverse data you have, the better because they can feel
The
confident.
better.
They can feel
Absolutely.
confident that like this drug is going to work in the
Yep.
patient population that I treat, the broad whatever population that I'm representing from a formulary and insurance perspective. And so that has a financial benefit to your company when there can be confidence from those decision makers in your data. So even for the people who don't want to do this for altruistic reasons, because
Yeah.
whatever, it's like I don't
Yeah.
care about the people. Maybe you care about the money. There's a very real business reason for doing this and doing this right that goes along with doing it for the benefit of patients.
You
So
said doing
that's what
it
I would
right.
tell pharma leaders. Like, don't forget that. There's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
Because doing it right doesn't always mean doing it for the right reason. But doing it right, let's just
It's
stop right there.
just get it done.
Let's do it the
Just
right
do
way.
it and do it well.
Yeah, and do it well. Do it well. If you're gonna do it, let's do it well. And let's come on. Okay, so the last thing we're gonna get out of here,
Okay.
but the last question is for our community because that's what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about community.
Mm-hmm.
How can we make us better? And I think research is so important to making us better, because again, that's how we come up with medications, right? That are going to
Yeah.
work for us. What's the message? What's your message for the community after all your community work? What do you say to your
Mm.
community?
Be empowered,
Mm-hmm.
right? Know that you're the patient.
Yes.
So you know what you're going through,
Yes.
and you have a right to ask your healthcare provider all the questions, right? And if they're not giving you the time or you don't feel like you're getting, you have a right to try to switch healthcare providers too, right? You can fire your doctor. We used to talk about that in some of our community work. And people would ask, well, my doctor's, well, let's help you find a new one, right? Like you can, so there's that, but also like, for things that you might be apprehensive about when it comes to the healthcare system, when it comes to clinical trials, because it's not always just clinical trials. I could tell you stories about people who like won't go get surgeries and won't take certain medications. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, so you just
Yeah.
going, these things are designed to help you, right? Like find someone that, has two qualities that you can trust and who is an expert in what they're talking about. And
Mhm.
again, please just be empowered to ask them as many questions as you feel like you need to ask. To ask as many questions as you feel like you need to ask in order to feel comfortable with whatever decision you have to make. And that doesn't mean you have to like do it, right?
Yeah.
But at least you'll be informed and educated. But make sure that the people have those qualities, right? You can trust what they're saying and they're an expert in what they're talking about. So
And
yes.
don't give up. Don't give up on that, because
Keep
some people,
going.
yeah, keep going. The message is keep going, because I feel like our community, sometimes we give up on finding the right people. Like, no, they will come. You will find the right person. Don't give up on that.
Yeah.
Finding,
And while it may help for that person to, be of the same hue, background, culture,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
They
Sometimes
might not be. So also
that's true.
like don't discredit what a physician or a pharmacist or nurse or whomever is saying just because again I'm a black woman. I ain't a
Yeah,
black woman, so I ain't gonna
yeah,
don't do that. Don't do that.
yeah.
Don't do that, right? You're gonna block your blessing, right? Use your discernment, right?
Yes. Fill
And
them
just
out.
yeah, feel
you
them
know,
out,
you
feel
know.
them out, and because there are a lot of folks who, yeah, you don't want to block your blessing. Again, it might be helpful to have that, but the
No,
way,
I have a doctor now that doesn't look like me, and I
Mhm,
love him. He's
mhm.
great. He's
Right.
he's so personable. I can feel that he really cares.
But that's trust. You have a trusted relationship, and so that is super. And so again, I didn't say they have to look like you. What did I say? Trust
Yeah,
your expert.
yeah,
Your physician, you
yeah.
trust your physician, you have a great relationship with your physician, he's an expert. Those are like the two of the key components.
Okay,
Yeah. Okay.
okay.
I think that's it.
Well, I love what you said. Look, I have a look. I be trying to put words together. So you said for the community, you have a right, but then you also said for the farmer leaders to do it right.
And
So
everybody needs to keep going.
keep going. Keep going. You have a right. You do it right. Okay, like we're gonna put that together in some way, and that's gonna be our that I love taglines, okay?
Okay.
People remember those things,
Mhm.
when you have those taglines to just, but yes, keep going. Thank you so much, Camille. I
Yeah.
really appreciate your voice. I appreciate your experience in this work and the legacy that you're leaving. And I can't wait to see what more that you do and the impact you have. Yeah, I'm just grateful to know you.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you and the work that you're doing as well with diverse research now. So
Thank
keep
you.
going.
All right. All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.